That's what I really want to thank Warner and the others for asking me to be here today, and whether that's working out or not, he'll have to tell you later. So I gave a talk to the board of Ochsner in September of 2017, and so I'm very pleased to be asked back. And Warner asked me if the presentation looked anything the same as it did in September of 17, so I went back and actually looked at the presentation, and it doesn't look anything like it at all, which just gives you an idea of how fast things are changing in healthcare right now. And what this presentation tried to do today is give you an indication of how things are changing, why they're changing so fast, and then how legacy organizations are going to have to react in order to continue to be important and relevant in healthcare. Because you know, in a disruptive environment, if you study it at all, you're not in a safety position by being large and important. Large and important doesn't guarantee you anything in disruption. There have been plenty of large and important organizations through many, many verticals in the disruptive environment that have either gone away, have either lost their relevance or have gone out of business entirely. And so today what I want to do is sort of set the framework of what's going on in the internet economy at large, and then how healthcare is reacting to that internet economy specifically. So this is Jim Hackett. He's the CEO of Ford Motor Company. He's been the CEO for a little over a year. And he has a really, really very difficult, tough job right now. Because sitting from where he sits, he can actually see the demise of the Ford Motor Company. The Ford Motor Company's been in business 115 years. There's probably no more iconic corporation in the world than Ford. But what's going on at Ford right now is they're struggling with very poor financial performance, and their stock price is terrible. Mark Fields, who was the CEO before Jim Hackett, was fired by the Ford family because the stock price was stuck at around $10. It's now around $11, which is not making anybody very happy. And Ford is being disrupted. The automobile industry is being disrupted by the fact of having to pivot to electronic cars and to move away from the internal combustion engine. And what the automobile companies are very worried about is being commoditized. And there's really direct lessons here for healthcare as well. And what is the commoditization? Is that cars right now are essentially rolling computers. So you have the tires, you have the transmission, you have the seats, you have the interiors, and then the rest of it is one big computer. One significant hard drive. As a matter of fact, I own a Range Rover, and I had it for 2 weeks. This is true. This is where I can really get distracted. I apologize. I owned this car for 2 weeks, and the transmission broke. The car literally would not move. It would not move. And so the dealer came and got the car. And I called the service manager and I said, "Can you fix it?" And he said, "We don't know yet." And he said, "But I took the hard drive out of the car." This is true. He said, "I took the hard drive out of the car and I FedExed it to the plant in England where the car was made. And so as soon as they read what was in the hard drive, they'll get back to me and tell me how to fix the transmission." Well, it turned out that they couldn't fix the transmission. They had to put a new transmission in the car. It took about 3 weeks to figure that out because the dealer and Range Rover were arguing about who was going to pay for the transmission, but that's a whole nother story. So what are the automobiles companies worried about? They're worried about that the profitability in cars is not in the actual car anymore. The profitability is in the tech that's going in the cars and the increasing tech that will be in the cars. And so what they're worried about is somebody else like Apple or Google or Microsoft or Amazon will actually create that technology, and they will be the ones who will gain the profitability from the car because that's where the value in the car will be. And everything else will not be valuable going forward. So Jim Hackett is really worried about what's going to happen to Ford. And you could actually have this 115-year-old iconic company go out of business. So what is Ford doing right now to try to be relevant, to try to remain profitable, to try to be important in the car industry? First, they're rethinking their purpose. And I want you to relate to, as I go through this list, this is a list of how to try to stay in business in a disruptive environment. So it applies as well to legacy hospitals as anything else. Rethink the purpose. So Ford has decided to be a mobility company rather than a car company. They see no future in being a car company. They want to be a company that helps people move around. Just think how that changes their competitive picture. It means they're not just competing against General Motors, it means they're competing against Uber and Lyft and all of those other companies that are in the mobility business as well. This is a really big, super competitive space. Secondly, you have to place bets. And this is a big deal because in the disruptive environment, when you place bets, you've got to get those bets right. You get those bets wrong, in disruptive environment, things are moving so quickly and so fast, you may not get another chance to place another bet. So they're going to pivot to electric vehicles, but in pivoting to the electric vehicles, they have to invest in the right vehicles. It's not just creating electric vehicles. And here's a strategic story of disruption that's just unbelievable. Ford recognized, as all the other auto companies did, that you had to have an electric entry into the market. So what car did they electrify first? The Ford Focus. Recently, Hackett did a press conference, and he said, he didn't say this, but you read between the lines, he said we were a bunch of idiots. What cars does Ford actually sell? The SUV and the F-150. That accounts for 90% of the profitability at the Ford Motor Company. What car did they electrify? The Ford Focus. That's really helpful. It doesn't matter. People might want electric cars, but they didn't want the Focus. So it was a really significant strategic move in the wrong direction. So what is Ford doing now? You probably all read about this. They're going to double down on SUVs. They're going to double down on the F-150. And they announced about 2 weeks ago that they're going to eliminate all sedans from the North American market. Almost all sedans, almost every sedan. The Taurus is gone. All the Focus sedans are gone. That's going to save them about $8 billion. And they're going to take that $8 billion and use that to electrify the rest of the fleet. Now, they also have to worry, that's plan B, but they have to worry about plan C. And plan C, of course, is self-driving cars. So they don't know, in fact, that electric cars will be the future because self-driving cars might be the future. And that's an entirely different business. And as I talk here, I think you can get an idea of the kind of problems that Jim Hackett has in being CEO. And I'm sure there's lots of days he sits there and said, I was nicely retired. Why did I take this job? They're going to reduce complexity and friction. I'm going to talk about complexity and friction in the consumer market in a little bit. But what's more unpleasant? What's the most unpleasant thing you can do besides getting a root canal? Go buy a car. I despise it. No matter how nice the salespeople try to be to you, they're not really nice. And they're not really nice by trying to be too nice. It's not a consumer experience that's going to work. And the automobile companies realize that the consumer marketplace has changed completely, and they have not changed with it. And then Hackett also says that he has to reorient the Ford culture, and this is really important, because you have to think about the Ochsner culture as well as you begin to bear up against the kinds of changes that we're having in healthcare. He wants to align the board, management, employees around a new purpose and a new pace. A new pace. In other words, he recognizes that they have to go so much faster than they've been going in the past. And they need to look at multiple time horizons, which he says are simultaneously now, near, and far. And that is that is such a powerful comment, because that is the strategic problem that all legacy businesses have, is how do you deal with now, how do you pivot to near, and what's going to happen with far? And so for them, this is what Hackett's disruptive strategy problem is. He has to make enough money now to move Ford near, which is electric, and position it for far, which may be self-driving. And he has to come out at the end of that profitable at a stock price that his shareholders will value and that will keep Ford Motor Company in business. Just think what I just said to you for the last 5 minutes, how hard that job is. That is a strategic business problem that we have never seen in the history of American capitalism. So Hackett said, companies never choose to die. And yet many, by not evolving, are enabling that kind of fate. I get up every day feeling like time can be wasted here if we don't get moving. And that's a great comment to cut out and to put on the wall in your office, because it's all about pace, it's all about speed, it's all about getting things done now, it's all about getting ahead of the competition, both the competition that you can see and the competition that you don't even know is there yet. So let's move to CVS. So when CVS announced that they were purchasing Aetna, I got a whole bunch of calls from clients, and then as I went around the country, people asked me, what is that all about? Why does a pharmacy company, there's 10,000 CVS pharmacies in America, why does a pharmacy company want to own an insurance company? And can that work? And then some bolder clients said, do they have any idea what they're doing? And so I thought maybe it might be a good idea to actually read what they're saying rather than speculate about what they might be thinking. So this was from the press conference when they announced that they were purchasing Aetna. Larry Merlo, CEO, he is a pharmacist, by the way. It's the perfect time to bring CVS and Aetna together, to create a new healthcare platform that can be easier to use. Now, listen to this very carefully, okay? That can be easier to use, less expensive for consumers, and create a new front door to healthcare in our country. Are you all sufficiently insulted by that comment? In 20 years from now, when we come back and write the history of healthcare in America, this quote will be in every book that's written in the history of healthcare. This is an insult to every hospital in the United States. And I don't imagine that, I've met Mr. Merlo, he's a really nice guy. But I imagine that this was done very purposeful. He sat down with his PR people to write this down, and they knew exactly what they were writing down. For the last 75 years, listen to me, for the last 75 years, the front door of healthcare in America has been America's hospitals. Your hospital. And Larry Merlo is saying that doesn't work anymore. We need a new front door to healthcare in America, and it's going to be us. It's not going to be you guys anymore, because you guys aren't really doing a very good job. You got to read between the lines here what he's saying. This is not a nice comment. He's not complimenting America's hospitals here. He's saying that you're not easy to use, You're very expensive, and we need a new front door that's going to be easy to use and much less expensive going forward. And what he's saying is that by putting Aetna and CVS together, they can pull that off. Now, as we'll go forward, we want to talk about that CVS Aetna is not the only competitor that thinks they can pull this off going forward. But this gives you an idea. When people say to me, how is healthcare changing? Well, this is how healthcare is changing. In the past, everybody sort of, we were in single lanes in healthcare for years. Insurers were in their lanes, pharmacies were in their lanes, hospitals were in their lanes, et cetera, and nobody crossed out or crossed over. And what Merlo is saying now is that we're going to occupy more than one lane. We're going to occupy as many lanes as we can in order to be that portal, that front door for Americans who need health care. We want to be that front door. And by being that front door, we'll attract all of these consumers into it, and it will give us an opportunity to produce much more revenue and much more profitability for our shareholders. And then, this is from CVS's first quarter earnings report. First quarter earnings report on May 2nd. So this is a big teleconference, and then all of the analysts listen in, and the CVS executives talk about what's going on. And so Larry Merlo was giving the report, and he got to the point describing its preliminary strategy with Aetna. And so this is the actual slide. Okay, I did not edit this. I did not make this up. This is the slide from the presentation. He said, the transaction creates the opportunity to rethink and reinvent U.S. healthcare. Rethink and reinvent U.S. healthcare. He said, we've begun to identify populations and innovation tools for first programs, which include primary patient populations, those with one of 5 chronic diseases, diabetes, hypertension, hyperlipidemia, asthma, and depression. Patients undergoing transition in care. Broader focus on managing high-risk patients. Sounds like what hospitals do. Initial tools in 4 major categories. 4 major categories. Interventions in stores. Interventions in stores. Activities in patients' homes. New digital tools and capabilities, and data and advanced analytics. At the end of this talk, I'm going to talk about an internet concept called the last mile. And what CVS is talking about right there with interventions in store, activities in patient homes, new digital tools, and data and advanced analytics, they are talking about the pivoting of CVS to a last mile organization as it relates to patient care. And you'll see how that fits together when I get to that point. And then he said, this combination will create an innovative new healthcare platform that will be easier to use, less expensive for consumers, and integrated broadly within the marketplace to deliver superior coordinated care. So to my clients who have been asking, what is CVS and Aetna up to? I would say they intend to eat your lunch and your breakfast and your dinner. So see, we're in a zero-sum game at this point. There may be sort of more client visits, but because of technology, there probably really isn't. You know, and we all know that the number of inpatients has been declining and will continue to decline. I had a fascinating conversation with a friend of mine who runs a healthcare system much like Ochsner. It's probably about the same size, maybe a little bigger. And I called him the other day and I said, how are you doing? And he said, I just celebrated my 10th anniversary as CEO of this healthcare system. And I said, fabulous. I said, what's changed over those 10 years? He said, when I became CEO, the percentage of revenue in our organization was as follows. Inpatient was 80% of our total revenue, and outpatient was 20% of our total revenue. When I finished my 10th year in 2017, inpatient was 44% and outpatient was 56%. And that statistic tells you everything you want to know and tells you exactly why CVS bought Aetna. Because their position is that the inpatient business is a maturing, declining business, and all of that growth that will be in healthcare going forward is in the outpatient sector. And they cannot play in the inpatient sector. They do not want to play in the inpatient sector, but boy, can they play in the outpatient sector as they expand their portfolio going forward. And as I indicated, they are not the only organization who sees this as fertile ground and sees all of these patients that have been sort of obliquely attached to other kinds of healthcare organizations can be brought into the game that they are now going to try to play. So we are moving from a hospital ecosystem to a healthcare ecosystem. And it's a little scary how slowly a lot of hospitals in the United States are figuring this out. You still go to a lot of places, and they are really, they are still inpatient organizations. They think about inpatient. They have a lot of outpatient work, but they really are inpatient. But we're moving from a hospital-only ecosystem to a healthcare ecosystem, and we have these organizations, CVS Health, Aetna, United Healthcare, Optum, Apple, Amazon, and others that are very anxious to play in what is a large healthcare ecosystem. They have no interest at all in playing in the inpatient ecosystem. All of that business is going to be left to you, and we're going to talk about, as we go through a little bit, how the financial realities and the financial integrity works going forward when you have all the inpatient business, but all of these other organizations are trying to take as much outpatient market share from you as they possibly can at the same time. And does that financial equation work for America's hospitals going forward? I have a strong doubt that for many hospitals across the country, as we move from that hospital ecosystem to healthcare ecosystem, it will deteriorate the financial condition and the financial statements of many of America's hospitals over the next 5 to 10 years. So what are the 3 challenges to the hospital's future? What are the things that everybody really needs to worry about right now that's causing the changes going forward? First, hospitals are analog in a digital world. And this is this is a big problem. And this is a big problem that both Apple and Amazon are about to take on. Everything that you do goes through this device. Everything. Banking, ordering retail goods, getting tickets, calling Uber, calling Lyft, pretty much everything that you do. And then, of course, for certain generations within our country, it's even more comprehensive. So for the millennials, it's just absolutely the thing to do. And yet, healthcare does not yet flow through this device. And I'll show you in a moment that I think that Tim Cook clearly intends for healthcare to flow through this device. And why is that? Because healthcare in America is a $3 trillion industry, and Apple and Amazon just can't keep their hands off of $3 trillion. So the digital technology has changed the world, as you all know. 80% of US adults own a smartphone. 3/4 of adults have used an on-demand online service. Total digital media use has tripled since 2010, and the top 4 companies by market cap are now Apple, Alphabet, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon. Isn't that unbelievable? We've had 220 years of American capitalism, and the 4 companies that now have the largest market caps in the world didn't exist 35 years ago. That's how dramatic the change in our business environment and our business model has been. So for busy Americans, the convenience of the digital economy is not a nice to have, it's a must to have. An absolute must to have. If you can't function on the digital platform, in a certain sense, you almost don't exist. Millennials especially are moving towards digital healthcare. And the millennials are now the largest single group in our population. 71% want to book appointments with a mobile app. 74% would prefer to see a doctor virtually. 75% look at online reviews before selecting a physician. 1/3 have downloaded a health app in the last 30 days, and 42% have already used back and forth video telemedicine. However, hospitals around the country remain largely analog. Only 14% offer digital tools and information to enable consumer engagement. 23% offer a range of virtual telehealth access points. 20% have an online price estimation tool, and 43% provide messaging between patients and providers. So we have throughout the industry a lack of a contemporary digital experience, which is already creating a major vulnerability for hospitals. Because just as a communication for everything else that you do is through that smartphone, eventually, and I think it's going to be soon eventually, not far eventually, the clinical experience will be organized around the smartphone as well. This is really stunning when you think, I've got 4 or 5 doctors, and some of them I can't communicate with an email. I can't. And they say, well, if you want to communicate with me electronically, you have to communicate through Epic. So you communicate through MyChart. Well, I discovered, in a kind of unfortunate way, that a number of my doctors weren't even reading their messages in MyChart. I happened to get my care at an academic medical center, and just completely accidentally, over a little issue that I had, I discovered that this doctor's residence or his executive assistant was reading his MyChart, and then was forwarding, I guess, whatever was edited to the actual doctor for communication. So stunningly, I didn't see that as actual email communication. And I had some amazing conversations I do consulting for this academic medical center, so I have the ability to talk to people the way other consumers and patients don't. And I went to the guy who's sort of the head doctor, and I said, I'm not happy about this, and I consider it a violation of my confidentiality. I absolutely do. And he said, why would you think that? And I said, you never told me that was going to happen. When I sent a MyChart to Dr. Smith, it said the email on MyChart was going to Dr. Smith, and it did not go to Dr. Smith. It went to his resident. If I had intended to send the email to the resident, I would have sent the email to the resident. So this guy was very upset, and he's a very good friend of mine, and we were not having a good conversation. I was very exercised by this, by the way. So he called a whole bunch of other academic medical centers, and he got back to me in about 2 weeks. And he said, you know what? The way that we handle the messaging in MyChart is the same way. I talked to 5, 6 other major academic medical centers in America, and they all do the same thing. And I said, that sucks. That was a technical complaint. So this is where So the whole world is going one way, and when it comes to digital communication, we're still trying to hold on to the old world. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to be the old world organization because we just can't figure out how to pivot to the new world, and maybe it's because we have a lot of participants and people in the clinical care process who don't want to pivot to the new world. They don't. They want to hold on to what they have. The second challenge is that new entrants are coming into the healthcare system. So we already talked about CVS Health, Aetna. Let's talk about United Healthcare Optum. United Healthcare Optum is a $200 billion organization. And now we can talk about scale and size and how scale and size are going to matter. The largest not-for-profit healthcare organization in the United States remains Ascension at $23 billion. So you can see United Healthcare is 10 times the size of Ascension. The biggest of the sort of the not-for-profit is Kaiser, which is now about an $80 billion organization. But if you want to drop back to the hospital-oriented organizations, then it's Ascension at $23 billion. So even though Ascension is a very large organization, drives a lot of revenue and a lot of cash flow, it is nothing compared to United Healthcare. Nothing. These are gigantic organizations. CVS Health and Aetna, when they merge, will be a $240 billion company. And Humana and Walmart are talking about merging, and if they merge, they'll be a $540 billion company. And so these will be the kinds of organizations that you will be competing with, and even though it feels like you have a lot of scale, on a relative basis, you don't. So United Healthcare made the decision about 10 years ago. They had a strategy meeting, and they came to the conclusion, they said to themselves, being an insurance company going forward is not a good idea. Being a single-lane insurance company is a really bad idea because we can be commoditized. And as a matter of fact, Steve Helmsley, who was the CEO at that point, said, if we stay just as an insurance company, we will be commoditized. So he said, what do we want to do? He said, we want to be in many lanes of the healthcare industry. We want to be in clinical care. We want to be in data. We want to be in heavy analytics. We want to own the platform and the chassis that runs healthcare in the future. And then over the last 7 to 8 years, they've actually pulled it off. They are, without a doubt, the strongest healthcare organization in America today in terms of their strategic vision and their ability to execute on that strategic vision. They now have 150 Optum locations, 140 urgent care clinics, 200 plus surgery centers, and that 30,000 physicians is not right because I can't change it fast enough to keep up with their acquisition of doctors. They now own and control 47,000 doctors in the United States. They own and control more doctors than Kaiser does at the moment. And this has been very surreptitious. They don't talk about it. They don't come around to you and tell you about how they're competing and how they're developing a new clinical care chassis in the United States. But they are. And everything that comes up that's available to buy, they buy. They bought Surgical Care Affiliates. They bought the DaVita Medical Group. They bought the Advisory Board. At Kaufman Hall, we say that United Healthcare wants to own every clinical care delivery process they can that does not require a large building. I want you to think about how important that is. They get it. They get that you have the fixed costs through the hospital. They do not want those fixed costs. They do not want that cost level that's up around here. They want to provide a clinical experience to those patients at a cost level that's down here. They want low variable costs and they want fixed costs that they can tightly control. And what they're doing now is combining and integrating the care delivery system with the insurance system and using the insurance system to drive patients to the points of care where they want the patient. This is an unbelievable point. We're about to have serious litigation in this country about who controls what kind of place each patient gets their care at. Because the insurance companies, and not just United Healthcare, but others, want to pick the place where you get the care because it has a convenience factor and a cost factor that is okay with them, and they want people to stay away from cost factor locations that no longer are okay with them. And they were pushing and forcing in that direction. And there is litigation in certain parts of the country where hospitals and doctors have sued Anthem, for instance, and said, it's not your right to drive that. You don't get to drive that. And Anthem is saying, you know what? We're paying the bill. We'll drive them anywhere we want. And this is a really profound change, and it's a really profound change from an outpatient perspective, because if you're just sitting back waiting for these outpatient consumers to show up, they may not show up because they don't have the discretion to show up. Because they get a huge copay if they don't go to a particular surgery center, or they have to pay for it all completely because they don't go to a particular surgery center. And you may want to refer them to your surgery center, but the insurance-consumer relationship that is being put together no longer allows this. And this is happening because the insurance companies no longer believe that the hospitals of America can control costs. It's as simple as that. They've absolutely lost confidence in your ability to control costs. They don't think you can. They don't even think you want to. And so as a result, they've come up with this different way of looking at the care delivery system. And then what's going to happen is they've got this whole thing working, and then they're going to start running it through this device. However, they may not get there first, because we've got tech coming. Tim Cook said healthcare is a big area for Apple's future. But more importantly than that, did you all see that at the end of February, Apple announced that it's launching medical clinics to deliver what it called the world's best healthcare experience to its employees? Now, I have had debates over the last couple of months where people say this is just a human resource thing, that Apple wants to provide good, convenient healthcare to its employees out in Cupertino. And I have friends who believe that, and I don't. I think this is a grand experiment to see if they can essentially technologize the healthcare delivery experience and the outpatient primary care experience. And if they can, if the reviews come back, their employees say, that was the best healthcare experience I ever had, you guys have really invented something very special, then you're going to see Apple medical clinics all over the United States. So I think what this is a grand experiment. And they're experimenting on their employees. And what Cook has talked about is essentially digitizing the experience and running the experience through the Apple iPhone. And so they're very coy about this. They're not saying much. But it's going to be really interesting when that first clinic opens. And I've been told that clinic could open as early as late third quarter, early fourth quarter. They are moving quick on this, and it will be very fascinating to see what they come up with. Amazon, we don't know, but everything that Amazon touches at the moment turns to gold. And you all know that they are part of the joint venture with Berkshire Hathaway. And with J.P. Morgan, 1 million employees to create an employee health care plan. And the reason that Amazon is in that is because both J.P. Morgan and Berkshire Hathaway realize that that plan has to be digitized, and it's Amazon's job to digitize that. They've said that in the next 30 days, the CEO of this new company will be announced. And you all know that when the press conference was held to announce this joint venture, Warren Buffett was there from Berkshire Hathaway, and his quote for the day was, healthcare costs are the tapeworm of American capitalism. So this is just another organization that has lost confidence in legacy healthcare to deliver convenient, accessible, and low-cost health care to a majority of America's citizens. And these corporate entities pose a threat to legacy health care because they're going to draw volume and loyalty from legacy organizations. They continue to take assets out of the system, and they threaten to overwhelm the not-for-profit influence on healthcare's future. When you think about if Apple should become a healthcare company, and Amazon should become a healthcare company. And then you think about the influence on state legislation and on federal legislation, and that not-for-profits might want that influence to go in one direction. If Apple and Amazon and others want it to go in a different direction, then we'll see the full corporatization of America's healthcare system in a very short period of time. So the stakes are extremely high here going forward. And third, payers are saying enough to hospital prices. CMS is reducing payment for outpatient services. CMS removed total knee replacement from the inpatient-only list. Anthem announced it will no longer pay for ambulatory MRIs and CT scans that are performed within hospitals. And Anthem will no longer pay for emergency room visits in what it interprets as non-emergency situations. So we're getting a continual now deterioration of the quality of reimbursement, both from a commercial side, from Medicaid, and from Medicare, and this continues to push forward and forward. And so that when we need to organize and push back against these competitive trends that are taking place, we have less and less money in order to do that. So we're sort of getting pushed from the right and pushed from the left at the same way, so at the same time. And now we have to come up with the same kinds of solutions that Jim Hackett has had to come up with for. So, and yet we have to have enough money, enough profitability, and enough size to come up with those solutions. A daunting task. So how can hospitals survive in the internet economy? Let's look at a few of the types and styles of strategies that are going to be necessary to fight back. First of all, let's look at disruption in the internet economy. What is a classic disruptive scenario? What is the definition of disruption? Innovators take a complex, high-priced service and offer it with more convenience and at a lower price, attracting consumers and drawing volume and revenue away from traditional providers. That should sound really familiar to you. Innovators take a complex, high-priced service. That's American healthcare. And then how does disruption actually process through the internet economy? Disruption is not the exception, it's the rule. Large, fast-moving, innovative companies use their size, their cheap capital, and their innovative spirit, and new technology, and a very aggressive sense of competition to overtake whole sectors. The difference in the internet economy and how competition has changed is that in the old days, if an innovator came in, they took aim at one company. They did not take aim at an entire vertical. And this changed the day that Steve Jobs went after music. He didn't just go after music companies. He didn't just go after record stores. He didn't go after just distribution of music. He didn't go after the making of music. He went after the entire music sector and said, I can change the entire way the revenue structure will work in music by running it through what at first was the whatever it was called, and then the iPhone. And then Jeff Bezos followed that up immediately by taking on the entire book business. Publishing, distribution, sales, reading. So this is how these organizations look at it. What is the beginning of the process and what is the end of the process? And then they don't want to play in one small vertical. They want to play in the entire process. Therefore, taking all of the revenue that was in one vertical and putting the revenue in their vertical. And that is exactly what's going to happen in healthcare as we move forward, as Apple and Amazon and others get more interested in our sector. So in order to compete in the internet economy, it requires strategies of the internet economy. That's what's really important. And there are 4 critical ones, and these come from Scott Galloway's book called The Four, The Hidden DNA of Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google. Scott Galloway is a marketing professor at NYU who specializes in the internet economy, a really smart guy. And so he said there are 4 strategies that are absolutely critical to survival in the internet economy. The first is you have to have a perfect product. So we said here, perfect your product, but they talk about perfect products. And these are terms of art and science out in California and Washington where these companies thrive and live. Terms of art and science. These are not just conceptual thoughts. This is a way of thinking about your business and processing your business. Second, get serious about costs. If your costs are too high, you get killed in the internet economy. You do, because people shop on price. They shop on other things, but they can tell what the prices are, and they can do price comparisons now that they could never do, so they don't get ripped off. Because they can tell if they want this and they can get it for $10, they don't have to pay $12 anymore. Because just hanging around, going through on your iPhone in the evening for 10 minutes, and you can figure out where the lowest price is. Third, remove friction. And again, this is a term of art. I'll talk about what that means. And 4, unbelievably important in the internet, control the last mile. And this is what CVS is trying to do right now. It is so obvious that they read Scott Galloway's book when they put out that slide to the analysts, because what CVS is now trying to do is get the consumer and control the consumer in the last mile. So first, perfect your product. Now let's look what Tim Cook said about 6 months ago. He said, healthcare hasn't been constructed in a way where the focus is making great products from a pure point of view. Listen to that, pure point of view. Those are not accidental words. Those words mean something at Apple. At Apple, Steve Jobs considered this to be a pure product. This is a pure product to them. In other words, it can be better, but it's the best. And Apple does everything they possibly can from a technological and engineering and psychological and emotional point of view to keep this as the best product. This is a Jungian product. For any of you who studied psychology in college, this is Steve Jobs will go down in history because this is into our collective conscious. I have 3 granddaughters, 4, 3, and 3. You have kids at that age? You give them this, and they know how to use it. They know how to, you walk in, and the 3-year-old is swiping, right? I've got my 3-year-old, Amelia, has an iPad, and she can work around that iPad to get up any kind of entertainment that she wants. She goes, and her fingers are going like, and she's 3 years old. And so this isn't a matter of being instructed. This is something that we sort of intuitively know how to use. And in Silicon Valley, they call that a perfect product, a pure product. And what Tim Cook says about healthcare today is the focus has been on making products that can get reimbursed through the insurance companies, through Medicare or through Medicaid. And he says, we bring a totally fresh view into this and say, forget all of that. What will help people? This is the most challenging quote for healthcare right now from a business model perspective you can ever read. If Apple truly is serious about getting into the healthcare business and provide delivery of care, this is how they will try to provide it. And while you're stuck on providing products that can get reimbursed, Apple will be going in a completely different direction, which they believe will be much more satisfying and much more pleasing to the consumers of America. So you need to continuously perfect their product. And let's face it, our products are not perfect. I've been doing this for 40 years. I never have ever been anywhere where any doctor or healthcare executive or hospital manager described their products as perfect. We hope that, in a given day, there just isn't like total chaos. And that's because we have been doing what Cook says. We're guilty as charged. We are guilty as charged. We have been overwhelmed by the reimbursement process in the United States, and we have constructed our products not to what will make patients happy, but to what will make the reimbursers happy. And that is if we don't leave that as quickly as possible, this will be an enormous competitive disadvantage. Second, get serious about costs. This chart I have up here for you is terrible chart. Terrible. The green line is the growth of operating revenue between 2010 and 2016. This chart was assembled by Moody's Investor Service. The blue line is the total expense growth rate. And so when Warren Buffett says that healthcare costs in America are the tapeworm of American capitalism, he's talking about this chart. Because you can see what happens here is that as revenues go up, costs go up. In other words, as healthcare organizations, as we operate them on a day-to-day basis, we do not have an independent point of view about costs. So Apple, for instance, is absolutely renowned for cost control in making the iPhone. On average, they charge $1,000 for every iPhone they sell across the world. Now, do you think they say, we'd like to make 10% profitability, so we'll make the iPhone for $900? No, that's not what they do. They say every day they've got a squadron of people trying to make that iPhone for less and less money. And if they can make the iPhone for $300 and make $700 a phone, they're going to do that every day. And that's how they're going to do it. And they're going to pummel costs. And they're absolutely famous for pummeling their suppliers to get those costs down, get those costs down, get those costs down. What this chart shows that in the hospital industry, we have no independent point of view on costs whatsoever. We say we want to make 5% profitability, and then we budget our revenue, and then we let costs come up so that we make 5%. And if then revenue goes down and we still want to make 5%, then we make our costs go down. But what this chart clearly shows is that there is no intention to make costs down for the sake that our businesses would be better and our civilization, our American civilization and our country's social network would be better if we made those costs go down because we could make those costs go down. But it's just been so long since we've had any history of that in the United States that we don't have this independent perspective on cost. And if Apple and Amazon and others begin to get into healthcare, this is going to be a killer. This is going to be a killer. And this is what Larry Merlo was talking at CVS. He was talking about this chart. And he said what CVS want to do is take the outpatient chart, look at the outpatient costs of healthcare organizations, and then he wants to make his cost chart go way underneath that, offering a much lower cost service to healthcare, to consumers, and eventually to insurers who will want to buy that lower cost service because they won't want to pay the higher costs that are out there right now. 3, remove friction. Now, the last 2 concepts are a little hard to explain, but stick with me for a little bit. Friction is a word that's actually used out in internet land in Silicon Valley and up in Seattle. And what it means is how inconvenient is it to process a transaction? So at Amazon, if they have a particular transaction and it takes 7 clicks to complete that transaction, they're trying to get that down to 6 clicks or 5 clicks because they consider each click inconvenient. And they're constantly worried that somebody will invent a better app that will make it easier and have less friction in it to complete the transaction. So for example, the basic competition now between Lyft and Uber is really who has the best ride-hailing app. And for people who use ride-hailing a lot, and there's a lot of them out there. I mean, I've got colleagues at Kaufman Hall who use Uber for everything at this point. They use Uber to come to work. They use Uber to go home. They just don't, they use Uber to go downtown. They use Uber to go to the airport. And they will stay with Uber as long as, you get up in the morning and it's really easy and the car comes right on time and all that works. That is the friction of that transaction. If there's any friction that creeps into those transactions, then the people who run those companies get absolutely frightened to death that somebody else will come up with an app that will work better. Google discovered that on a search, people will stay online on average of 9 seconds. And they know that search engine has to work that fast, or there's plenty of consumers out there who will abandon the search. They won't stay on the screen longer than 9 seconds. That's absolutely unbelievable. But that is the business model that they're absolutely catering to at this point. So friction is a critical aspect of success or failure in the internet economy. And in hospital events, clinical events, we have nothing but friction. That's all it is. It's one big friction event. Appointment scheduling, communication with and among providers, wait times, difficult wayfinding, repetitive paperwork, confusing billing, and perhaps most of all, lack of digital options for care and communication. And so we're sort of at the point, I'm telling you, where we need to go back and start over. And we need, all of you who are in managerial positions need to be secret shoppers. If any of you out there run clinical departments where appointments are involved, once a week or once every 2 weeks, call to make an appointment and see how that goes. And see how much friction that's in that process. I've gotten to the point now where I'm so difficult that when I call to get an appointment, I start the stopwatch on my iPhone. And I time how long it takes, first of all, them to answer the phone, and second of all, how to get an appointment. Sometimes I go online, but I don't think the online appointment scheduling app in my chart works very well. Certainly doesn't work that great for me. The last time I was downtown, and you know how I got an appointment? I went up into internal medicine and went to the person and the clerk and made an appointment, and that took about 90 seconds. That is not good. If you have to actually go to the place to make an appointment, and it takes, and that's the fastest way to make an appointment, as opposed to calling or doing it online, that's inconvenience squared. And there isn't an app code writer manager out on Amazon and Apple who isn't licking their chops to get at you because they know they can do that so much better once they put their mind to it. So you need to have a friction task force at Ochsner, a friction task force. And you have to walk yourself right through the entire organization, taking as much friction out of every important consumer interaction you can, whether it's outpatient, in the emergency room, all the important places. The wayfinding and the wait times you're asking to get killed. What is the one thing that Amazon doesn't have? What is the one thing that Amazon doesn't have? A parking garage. I've spent 40 years in this business, and I can't tell you the number of hospitals who were so proud of their first parking garage. It had meant that they had gotten big enough and busy enough that they needed a parking garage. In the internet economy, you might as well, You might as well chain that parking garage to both feet and jump in the Gulf and drown. That's how good the parking garage is for your, like who wants to go to a parking garage? They're dark, they're dangerous, you can't figure out how to get out, you can't figure out how to get your car out, you can't figure out where you're going. It's just a marvelous experience. You drive around for 20 minutes looking for a space, you find a space, and then you go to your appointment to discover that they're 40 minutes behind. This is a really high-powered consumer experience. And it ain't good. We've gotten away with it for 40 years, but we're not getting away with it any longer. Now, this is really important. Little hard to explain. But basically, Amazon and Uber invented the concept of the last mile. And what is the last mile? Jeff Bezos came to the conclusion that you went online and you bought diapers and you paid for diapers. And in capitalistic history, that was when the transaction was over. And Bezos said, no, the transaction's not over until the consumer has the product and they're using the product. That's when the transaction is over. And he said, nobody's ever monetized the last mile. Nobody's ever thought that there was value in how quickly that product could get from the last click to the consumer. But I could offer like 4 different delivery concepts in the last mile, and I could actually monetize that. So if you just give me a credit card, you can get it in 5 days. If you're a Prime member and you pay me $90 a year, and by the way, there are 90 million Prime members now. One of the most brilliant business decisions in the history of business, and that would cover 10,000 years, not 100 years. So you can get it in 2 days, but if you pay me more, I'll get it to you in 2 hours. And now, of course, Amazon's playing around, can they get it to you basically instantly? And you just pay it up to the level of your hysteria, right? I think that Amazon, because they have such great data, that their next step is segmenting their market into relaxed people and hysterical people. And if you're a relaxed person, they'll contact you maybe once a month. But if you're a hysterical person, you'll get email from them about once an hour, because they know you're willing to pay up for pretty much anything that they can provide you with at the time. So the concept of delivering that, of getting that to you, is called the last mile. And the best example of the last mile right now, the very best example of the last mile right now, is delivery of restaurant food. It's the fastest growing part of Uber's business, Uber Eats. And of course, you also have Grubhub. And it's just, when you start to study this, the fascination just never stops. Do you know what it's turning out? I'm going to come back to the last mile. But do you know what's turning out to be the most valuable part of Grubhub and Uber Eats as a company? I try to plug in. I try to see this. I try to stay ahead of these business trends, but as hard as I try, I can't. So I read this article the other day, and I fell off my chair. They had to come in and, My assistant had to come in and give me oxygen. Are you okay, Ken? Are you okay? No, I'm not. I'm stupid. I can't think of these smartest ideas. Why are these people so much smarter than I am? That's what I was saying. They just, they just left me. They'd given up anyway. So the most valuable part of Uber Eats and Grubhub now is the customer list. And the restaurants are doing joint ventures with Uber Eats and Grubhub, not so much to create the delivery of food, although that's important, but to get the customer list so they can market through the customer list. Because the organizations that now have the largest and most comprehensive list of people who eat out in a segmented basis are Grubhub and Uber Eats. Because Uber Eats knows whether you go to Kentucky Fried Chicken or whether you go to the best restaurant in New Orleans. And of course, the other thing that's happened is all these fine dining guys were like, oh, well, we'll never deliver our food. Oh, yeah? When you have a half-empty restaurant, I bet you will. And it's completely changing the way that restaurants are built and constructed. Restaurants now have, many restaurants in New York, in places like New York and Los Angeles and San Francisco and Chicago have 2 kitchens. One kitchen serving for people who come and sit down, and another kitchen for all these guys coming, picking up the food to deliver it in order to keep it hot, in order to make it a product. There are also startup companies now that just develop technology to keep the food hot while it's in the car between the restaurant and you. There's actually startups, VC, venture capital supported startups to do that. It's a whole different thing. And this is the last mile. The last mile is you get it the way you want it. If you want to go and eat at the restaurant, then the restaurant is your last mile. If you want that meal delivered to your house, then your house is the last mile. Now, this is unbelievably important because it's defining the way our capitalist economy works in 2018. And it's unbelievably important for healthcare organizations because up till this point, we have completely flunked the last mile. You know what the last mile in a healthcare organization is? Is here's the building, get your ass down here. That's the last mile in healthcare. And I can tell you, if Amazon and others get into this, they're going to absolutely take you apart in this particular aspect of your business model. Because they will provide the last mile for the consumers and for the patients on an outpatient basis exactly as the consumer and the patient want it delivered. While we're still, you have to come to this doctor's office, you have to go to this outpatient radiology, you have to come into this big hospital, we have to drag you into all of the inconvenience and all of the cost, and people are going to say, well, if I can get everything delivered, if I can get food, if I can get everything else from Amazon, then why can't I get a structure of healthcare delivery that meets my requirements as well? All of you who have millennials know that what's the highest goal and objective of a millennial's existence? To live a full and complete and rewarding life and never leave their bedroom. And thanks to Jeff Bezos, it's more and more possible every day. So the last mile implications for healthcare is that healthcare's last mile is among the least convenient and least appealing of any industry. Non-traditional competitors will view this as legacy healthcare's greatest vulnerability. And hospitals need to rapidly find a way to make healthcare's last mile not a chore, but an experience in the way that they describe experience in Silicon Valley. So getting care close to, if somebody wants to get their care a mile from their house, you have to figure out how to make that possible. If somebody wants to have a whole lot of their care in their house, you have to figure out how to make that possible. If you don't, we have an entire internet economy that's completely focused on delivering everything possible, eventually including healthcare from that perspective. So understanding the last mile and beginning to deliver care within a concept of a last mile is absolutely critical in order to stay ahead of the kind of competition that we're going to get. So what all of the above shows about the current business of healthcare is, first, that far more resources are needed to be a leader in healthcare. We need a huge investment of financial and intellectual capital in order to transform healthcare to something that's going to be much more competitive to where United, Optum is going, and where CVS is going, and perhaps Apple and Amazon. We're seeing a new level of for-profit competition entering healthcare in a different way than we've ever seen it before. This is not HCA. HCA was basically a for-profit model of our own business. And this is going to be a for-profit model of somebody's different business, but not our business. So this is a completely new, different way to go. And finally, becoming a commodity is real and a really bad possibility. We started off this talk talking about how Ford and Jim Hackett are really worried about getting commoditized. And we talked about how Steve Helmsley at United was really worried that if he just stayed in the insurance business, he would get commoditized. And Larry Merlo was clearly worried at CVS that if he just stayed in the pharmacy business, he was going to get commoditized. And when you get commoditized, you lose control of your prices. The first time you're commoditized, you get a price you can live with. The second time you negotiate that price, you get a much worse one. And the third time around, you get a terrible price and one that you can't really operate your business on going forward. So being commoditized is, as we say here, a really bad possibility. So the to-do list for Ochsner or anybody else for 2018 and beyond is lower and control your costs, get the friction out of your provider products, make sure you understand and begin to control the last mile, and digitize engagement and care. If these four things don't get done going forward, then you'll find that the kind of competition that we're getting in, they're going to check these boxes, and more you'll be at a disadvantage, more and more you lose market share, more and more you'll get commoditized on prices, and it gets harder and harder and harder every day to run your business, to have any relevance or any market flexibility going forward. This is from Jeff Bezos' letter to shareholders for 2017. This is getting to be a very famous letter. He's sort of starting to get up in the Warren Buffett world. And this was this particular part of the letter zoomed around the internet the day that the letter came out. And we call it at Kaufman Hall, today's commercial principle for everything. And Bezos said, "One thing I love about customers is that they are divinely discontent. Their expectations are never static. They always go up. It's human nature. We didn't ascend from our hunter-gatherer days by being satisfied. People have a voracious appetite for a better way. And yesterday's wow quickly becomes today's ordinary. I see that cycle of improvement happening at a faster rate than ever before. It may be because customers have such easy access to more information. In only a few seconds and with a couple of taps on their phones, customers can read reviews, compare prices from multiple retailers, see whether something's in stock, find out how fast it will ship, or be available for pickup." These examples are from retail, but I sense that the same customer empowerment phenomena is happening broadly across everything we do at Amazon and most other industries as well. You cannot rest on your laurels in this world. Customers won't have it. I would strongly suggest you print that out, put it on your desk, and make it the guideline for what you do and how you do your business every day. Because we're going to get chased down, and if we're sort of not thinking about things from this perspective that Bezos describes, then it's going to be really hard to maintain the legacy position of healthcare in the United States over the next 20 years the way it's been the last 50 years. Thank you very much. It was great to be here. Thank you very much.